One, one, two, one, two. One, two, one, two. Hello, hello. Hello, can you hear me? Hello? One, one. Does that sound loud enough right there? Is that loud enough for you? Okay. Is that too loud? No? Okay. Okay.
financial advisor, what is rule number 1? I know you guys have a lot of stuff to remember, medicine, whatever. Never ask a financial advisor if they work with physicians, because they'll always say yes, right? The correct question is, what percentage of your revenue comes from working with physicians? That's the right answer, right? Because when I was at Merrill Lynch, when I was younger, we managed almost $500 million for about 200 families, and we had 11 physicians. It was a minuscule part of our business, right? But to back up what your chief said, my business is primarily healthcare, and about 75% of my revenue is from physicians. So I know what I'm talking about. At least I think I know what I'm talking about. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I got to turn this mic on. Yeah, you got it. All right. Okay. Is that any better? Better? Much better? Okay. That is a nice segue. That I'm not a very technologically savvy guy. If I had it my way, my office would just have a rotary phone and an IBM Selectric typewriter. This presentation crashed on me Sunday, and so I spent like the last 30 hours or so rebuilding it because the backup had 5 slides. And so I spent a lot of time, and so I've skipped a lot that's on here. But anyway, nonetheless, here we are. So top personal financial mistakes made by physicians. This was commissioned by a client of mine. He said, hey, Jason, put this together. I'd like to see what other people do and don't do and so forth. And so when I made it, I said, hey, here's based on my years of experience, what I've seen. And as we were going through it with him, he checked off 9. And so I told him, I said, well, Doc, I didn't really make it just for you. But anyway, this could actually be the top personal financial mistakes made by anybody. It's just, however, I see physicians concentrating on these 15 things over and over again. Number 1, not understanding where all the money is. There's always money in the checking account. Money comes in, money goes out. You never really know what's going on, how much money you're paying in interest and excessive fees, so forth and so on. There's always money there. So that is probably one of the largest errors, because what you want to try to do is keep as much money or have as much money returned to you as possible. And there are lots of things like interest. Interest is money, is your wealth that goes away that never comes back, or rarely comes back. So this is one of the slides that was saved, that I was going to have like this little bullet point and then follow up. And so anyway, only 32% of Americans keep a household budget. So it's very key to develop a budget. There's lots of really great apps and software to do it. It makes things so much easier now. Used to, when people had Quicken, they'd have spent hours inputting stuff into the Quicken, whatever. So many of these apps now and the software just links to your checking account or your credit card statement. It captures it, it classifies it for you, and there you have it. So make a budget and then try to stick to it. By the way, feel free to ask questions along the way. I want this to be interactive. However, on your evaluations, there are spots for 3 or more questions, I suppose. If something doesn't come up that you want to know about, if it is too personal to ask in front of a room of your colleagues, or we just ran out of time, I will not bug you or hound you, but however, I will do my best to answer every question by email if you so desire. Number 2, allowing lifestyle to creep up with income. So this goes right along with number 1. The more you make, the more you spend. So again, there's nothing wrong with lifestyle creep as long as you have your bases covered that according to whatever your plan is. So, and then 14 and 15, that goes with that as well. But very, very easy to get caught in this trap of make more, spend more. Now, I'll give you a true life example of a different one. So this is a couple I work with. He's a surgeon, she's a dermatologist, and they make about $900 a year. Their goal requires about $500 a year. So after taxes, they have nearly $100,000 of free money to spend. So it looks like they live pretty well because they have all this money to spend, but actually they've covered all their bases. Now, of course, a lot of you think, well, $900,000 is a lot. Well, But it's all about scale, because here's what happened. With this particular couple, the first 6 years I worked with them, they lived on a monthly budget of $10,000. $120,000, I mean, I don't know what that math is, a little bit more than 10% or so of their gross income. They paid off their house and all their student loans in 6 years. Now they save a ridiculous amount of money, and they live incredibly well, and people think, oh man, they're living really, really well. Well, they are, and they're living as well as their counterparts, except most of the people in their peer circles are in debt up to their eyeballs. And so they lived what I call the resident plus lifestyle, $60,000 per person for the household, and they really worked hard. So whether you make $900,000 or $300,000 or $200,000, it's all about having a plan. It's all about working on scale. And maybe it's not 6 years for you, maybe it's 9 years or 10 years or 11 years or whatever, but working very, very hard to eliminate debt and then start saving. And it's about, and there's a slide about this later on, but you can live well now and pay later, or you can live pretty good now and live great down the road. So, again, have a realistic horizon for your goals, make a plan, and coordinate your plan with your budget. Setting unrealistic expectations for their children's future. So, neurosurgeon makes $1 million a year. These kids come into their lives. The kids grow up. The kids have this lifestyle that they never remember mom and dad living in the 2-bedroom apartment, right? Or they never remember dad struggling as a resident, making $48,000 a year, and mom had a part-time job. So what happens is there's this fine line between needs and wants. It's a gray area that some people never quite understand. And so these children grow up, and they've always had money. Again, this is all about scale. It's about how you treat them. But then what happens is they become adult children, and they start hitting up mom and dad because, this child of this neurosurgeon is an engineer. Makes $75,000 a year. That's a good living, but it's not the living he's used to. So now mom and dad starts kicking in some money to help out with these other things called adult family welfare. The other problem with this is that oftentimes if the parents don't have good money skills early on or at all, they usually fail to pass those on, and then this just gets into a cycle of repeat. And usually what happens is it ends up that the children have massive amounts of unserviceable debt. 60% of parents provide financial support to adult children. It's a little bit old, but it's the best statistic I could find. A big part of it is usually paying for grandchildren's private tuition, assisting for mortgage payments, because again, these kids don't buy a starter house. They buy the house they grew up in, that dad, the neurosurgeon, could afford, but the kid, the engineer, can't afford. Cell phones, car payments, etc. So work with your children early on in life. Try to teach them things about budgeting. You can even set them up a checking account. There's a number of things. This is a whole other seminar, actually. If you give your children an allowance, just 1099 them, so then you make their allowance tax deductible to yourself. But what that also does is it gives them a paper trail. So now they have earned income, so then they can contribute to a Roth IRA. And so I've seen some parents say, hey, for every dollar you put in, I'll match you $1, and so forth. And so you can do things, begin teaching kids very early on. I have seen children as young as 4 have Roth IRAs. Funny story, I have some friends of mine in Minneapolis, and they run a design firm. And for about 4 years in a row, they did the Target toy wish book for Christmas. And all the models in that wish book was all the designer's kids. And so Target sent all those kids a 1099, and so then a lot of the parents just opened Roth IRAs for all their kids and put all that money into a Roth IRA at 4. Compound interest, that's 56 years before they can take it out. So anyway, lots of things you can do, but try to raise your children to have realistic expectations that, hey, mom and dad worked very, very hard for this. We went through years of not having a job, med school, residency, fellowship, whatever. It wasn't always this rosy. Number 4, sending children to private universities. Rarely does this translate into higher incomes, better education, or better jobs. And it's a debate back and forth, right? But oftentimes what happens is parents then begin eroding away everything they've saved to pay these massive bills. And then a lot of times, if you come from a particular middle-class background, a lot of the children at private universities are not from middle-class backgrounds. They have to kind of keep up with the Joneses. And then it will just rapidly eat up years' worth of savings. The other thing that I kind of crack myself up with is if your child ever wants to be a major in anything ending in the word studies, Latin American studies, women's studies, whatever, gender studies. Yeah, none of those degrees are employable. So you can just tell the kids, they can pay for it themselves. What I have seen parents do, say, well, look, here is the in-state tuition at OSU. This is what I'll pay, and if you want to go to wherever, you've got to pay that difference yourself. Now there is some debate too. Maybe do your undergrad at a public school, and then do your research, do your graduate school at a private institution that has better research facilities or whatever, right? So of course, college graduates statistically make more money than a high school diploma. There's just not a lot of data that shows that going to a private university is a good return on investment. Always save for your retirement goals first, education second, because your kids can always borrow to go to school, as many of you know, right? But the kids have the ability to bounce back because they have more time, right? When you retire, you have a couple different resources. They have a lot of resources to pay for school. Utilize the 529 college savings plan. In the state of Oklahoma, you get a state tax deduction for that, up to a maximum of $20,000 a year of contribution to that plan. You can contribute more to that, but you're only deductible up to $20,000 a year. What's interesting about this is that as your incomes go up, your tax deductions are going to phase out. The 529 plan does not have an income ceiling. You're not capped at any particular income. So regardless of how much money you can make, you can still get the deduction on your state return. So we'll talk about this in another slide, but try to use every deduction you can, and that way you can build up savings for a child. Another idea here that some clients utilize is using a whole life policy. The cash value in that policy, by the time your children get to be 18 or 20, you have a fair amount of cash into it. You can borrow from that tax-free. The interest that you pay, you're charging interest on your loan. The interest that you pay back doesn't go to the insurance company. The interest goes back to your own account. So you can become your own Sally Mae and teach your kids a little bit about hard work. Let them borrow from you rather than a bank, and then you recapture all their interest, not a bank capturing their interest, and make them work to pay off their loan. Questions? Okay. No, it means that you're going to get that interest. So versus if, in fact, if you co-signed that loan and you paid it, instead of going to Simon or whomever, yeah. This is a good one. Number 5, buying new cars or planes, RVs, and the worst of all, boats. Boats really get me. I'm not opposed to lake culture, but here's the deal. So anything that in this category that you buy new, you're almost certain to have a less valuable asset the very next day, right? It's just how the markup and depreciation on all of these. And so the problem, too, is physicians tend to buy more expensive cars, which have a higher rate of depreciation. And it just, you know what, in your lifetime, if you just park them all out in the field next to your house, at the end of that time, you're going to have about 8 or 9 rusting hunks of steel. And that's about all. That's just throwing money down the drain. Boats kill me, though. So, especially if you buy a new boat. So I sat down with a guy one time. A long, complicated story, but essentially he had this boat that he used about 8 weeks out of the year. So he had to pay storage on it because the neighborhood that he lived in, his homeowners association didn't allow him just to park it in the driveway, right? So he had to pay storage, he had to pay insurance, all this stuff, and for 8 weeks out of the year, I'm like, hey, why don't you just co-op this with somebody, or rent one or something for as much time as he used it at the lake and his lake home. That's a whole other story, but it was just an incredible, and then the maintenance. I mean, it's just an incredible black hole of cash for this boat for very little use, I think. Okay, that was about where I got with all my extra slides. So some of these I'm just gonna. There's no follow-up slide to that. Number 6, buying too much house. Working as a surgeon right now, makes decent money, good money. He has $1.2 million mortgage. He doesn't have 2 nickels to rub together. He is going to be in debt almost his entire working career, mostly because he has this huge mortgage to pay, which means he can only pay the minimum on his student loans, and you're going to keep your house before you pay your student loans, and it's just on and on and on and on. I mean, it's all about debt service, and it's basically going to be all about debt service for the most of his life. So there's all these other things to consider. I mean, there's the purchase price, and then you've got taxes, maintenance, furnishings. They also bought $40,000 of furniture when they bought this $1.2 million house. $40,000 of furniture, right? Just crazy. So decorations, landscaping, insurance, utilities. One thing you may or may not know about utilities. Anybody in here own a house? A few people? Okay. So when you're going to buy a house, the law in Oklahoma allows you to get 1 year's worth of utilities on that house as part of your purchasing with your realtor, whatever that process is called. It's early for me, okay? So you can get 1 year's worth of utilities, and it will tell you, is this house well insulated, is it energy efficient, but it's something you have to think about in the total cost of the house. But you are entitled to 1 year's worth of utility bills for that property. Let's see. I lost myself here. So physicians too also can compound their problems by moving several times in a 10-year period of trying to get into the right neighborhood, the right school district, whatever. And, if you move, I talked to a person one time that had moved 4 times in 10 years or something like that. And that it's just closing costs and money. It's just money that you're just not ever going to get back. Again, here, think about this. The impact of an additional $5,000 a month, say buying a $600,000 house versus $1.2 million or whatever, going into investment over a 15-year period of time versus a mortgage. So here's some strategies early on for once you finish your training and you're wanting to go out to the workforce. Total housing cost should be 34% gross income. That includes mortgage, utilities, maintenance, insurance, and taxes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Furniture, homeowners association. 34% of your gross, max. I've rarely ever seen anybody become financially successful who spends more than that. It's very difficult. A lot of times people want to buy, but renting, a lot of times you get a job and it sounds great when you sign your contract, and after you've been there for a year, you're like, man, I hate these guys. This sucks, whatever. And now you're stuck because you own this house, particularly if you're moving to another city, right? So renting allows you to make sure that you like your job, that you're going to stay. It also helps you be able to buy a home on your own time schedule versus whatever is available on the market when you move there, right? Particularly, too, if you're moving to a new city, it helps you find the neighborhoods that you like to, live in or whatever. Another idea is to buy a modest starter home pay it off in a couple of years, figure out where you really want to live. Now you have equity here, and you can turn that into a rental property. Now you've got an income flow to help pay your mortgage on the bigger, better house that you have. When you find your permanent home, try to pay it off in 10 years or less. The number one fear that I get, that I see from most physicians, is they're afraid of their income drying up. Something happening, reimbursements cut, they get sued, they lose their life, whatever. There's a myriad of possibilities here. If you live in Oklahoma, or pretty much anywhere in the Midwest, if your home is paid for, utilities are cheap, taxes are cheap. It's fairly inexpensive to live in Oklahoma if your house is paid for. So this is kind of also, more of a long-term wealth protection strategy if something negatively happens to your job. I love this. I read this in college. Beware not to let that which you own you. My surgeon, who has a $1.2 million house, the house owns him. It's taking everything that he does to make this mortgage payment. Number 7, living under the impression that as a physician you must live a certain lifestyle. You must have a certain house in a certain neighborhood. Your kids have to go to a certain school. You must drive a certain type of car, so forth and so on. It's keeping up with the Joneses on a bigger scale. It's really all what's relevant to you in your plan, in your future, not so much what somebody else is doing or whatever. Number 8, not properly insured for disability. We've got a really good story about this one. So, all right, you're young. You have a lot of time ahead of you. Many of you work with your hands. Very, very small things can drastically affect your future in terms of illness or injury. In the disability world, it is defined as any injury or illness that prevents you from doing the job for which you are trained. So, whenever I talk to people about disability, ironically, physicians, most people think Stephen Hawking, quadriplegic, drool, and that's what's called a catastrophic disability. That's less than 1%. You see horrifically terrible things happen to people every day, so you should have a very good understanding of what disability is and what it can do to people. The top 2 causes that are 52% of all disability claims are cancer and bone and joint problems. But there's also all kinds of things. If you're a surgeon and you lose just the tip of your index finger, that could prevent you from cutting. That could be a disability. There's many, many things that could prevent you from doing your job. And you have much higher odds at a younger age that you're going to be disabled much more likely than you're going to pass away. Now, in a 2-income household, had 2 physicians who told me this. She said, "Hey, I'm his disability policy." They both had good incomes. "I'm his disability policy. He's mine." Great. So your husband gets terminal brain cancer, and now half the income in the household is lost. You have a high cost of living, and you're going to spend the last 8 or 9 months of his life working just so you can pay the bills? I don't think so. Had he had a quality disability policy that was probably less than 2% of his income in terms of premium, you guys could be living off his disability policy, and you don't work for 9 months while you and your family bond together for the last few months of his life. That's a horrible, horrible argument, and it's completely, it's just not a very logical argument. So, let me give you some basic facts about this. For a physician, there are about 10 insurance. There's a lot of insurance companies that offer disability policies, but for physicians, there's only about 10. You want to make sure that a policy that is your own occupation, right? So you are a gastroenterologist. You are doing procedures. You develop some kind of chronic arthritis or something that prevents you from doing procedures. but you began your career in internal medicine. If you had an own occupation disability policy, you would then draw a disability policy based on the income of a gastroenterologist, and you could still go back to work as a internal medicine, as an internist. So own occupation just means you're only disabled from doing your own occupation, right? Go back and do a fellowship for radiology, whatever. Each company treats each specialty different. Any anesthesia in the room? No? One? No? Okay. On this, so for instance, out of these 10 companies, 9 of them see pain management and anesthesia as the same specialty. One company sees it as 2 different ones, even though most pain management specialists start out as anesthesiologists. So one company sees that as a different specialty. So interventional pain management, a lot of procedures, what have you, they lose the ability to do pain management. They could then draw a pain management disability benefit and go back to being an anesthesiologist like the very next day. So you need to find out how your specialty is treated. For instance, one company, they just don't want anesthesiologists at all. And for that, how I know that is because they price them as the most expensive specialty in their disability spectrum. Why do they not want anesthesiologists as clients for disability? Because in Maryland, that I know, there may be others, but in Maryland, there's a rehab clinic that is nothing but anesthesiologists. As a group, anesthesiologists have the highest substance abuse problems because they have all the stuff, right? And so substance abuse is a disability, and so this company just doesn't want to mess with it, so they price them very, very highly. So you need to find out which policy, what company treats your specialty. Group long-term disability. Here's the problem. Question? No? Just stretching? Okay. So 2 weeks ago, I met with a young woman, 32 years old, has a lot of debt, husband doesn't work, 2 kids, she makes $480,000 a year. We did a disability policy, and then she talked to her lawyer, who told her that she has one at work, that she doesn't need a private disability policy. All right? That lawyer clearly does not know what they're talking about. If you understand this, one thing you'll understand more than most people do about disability insurance. This is all provided that you're insurable, that you get your own private policy to begin with. Group long-term disability provided by your employer is often likely capped, and the ratios are different, but it's always going to be capped at 60% of income or up to $6,000 per month. If your employer pays for it, it's going to be taxable. Private disability insurance, the benefit is tax-free. Because your employer takes a tax deduction for the premium, that makes your benefits taxable. While some of the better group policies may have own occupation, it's usually for a limited period of time, 2 years or so. After that, they're going to require total disability for you to keep getting your benefit. This is what her group policy was. So let's say she becomes disabled and gets really bad arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, because she works with her hands, and that would be very debilitating. So she is going to bring home $72,000 versus $480,000 gross. Then it's going to be taxed. So she's going to bring home about $50,000. And then after 2 years, her disability company is going to make her go back and say, well, sure, you can't do this anymore, but what else can you do? And they're probably going to most likely cut her off. I have no idea what her attorney told her to convince her otherwise. But this is the big thing. Group disability is nice. It's better than nothing. If you're uninsurable and you take a job, it's great. But not being properly insured for disability is a very, very high risk to your income. Buy it as soon as you can. Today's likely the healthiest you're ever going to be in your life. Every year this happens, somebody says, I want to wait till I finish my fellowship. And they wait. And like last year, I had 3 heart valve problems, MVP, on 3 people. They've had it. It was just never diagnosed. As long as it's not diagnosed, it's not in your chart, so you could qualify for the insurance. However, the longer that time goes by, eventually something's going to happen to variable or a rated policy. Lastly, have a rider on your policy that allows you to increase your coverage as your income increases. And that way, you only have to buy a policy once, and it keeps up with you regardless of what happens to your health. Questions? Everybody bored out of their mind? All right. Number 9, this is a good one. This is an interactive one here. Taking too much portfolio risk. All right. So, regardless of what your income is, the average income in the United States is $59,000. So, regardless of what the income in this room, the lowest paid person in here is going to make more than the average person, right? And if you live a fairly modest lifestyle, you're probably going to be able to save to any kind of goal that you have in the future. But you have all these other risks out there, right? Lawsuits. And I define risk as anything that separates you from your money that prevents you from reaching a goal, right? So inflation, taxes, lawsuits. Also, remember, it's not necessarily lawsuits from patients that you should be worried about. You have malpractice insurance to cover large portions of that, if not all of it. It's the lawsuits from people who think you're rich, right? And those happen every day, frivolous lawsuits. Government regulation, cutback on reimbursements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in the financial world, when you're measuring risk of an investment, so you have a benchmark, say it's the S&P 500. So if you have the exact same amount of risk as the S&P 500, that means you have a beta of 1. Okay? If you're taking more risk, you have like a beta of 1.8, or less risk, a beta of 0.5. So everybody with me so far? What beta means? Every day when you walk out of your house, you guys are like a beta of 2.5. People want your money. Everybody's got their hands out or hands in your pocket one way or the other. So why voluntarily take additional risk in your life by shooting for a 42% return in your IRA? It makes no sense. Okay? My industry has done a pretty good job of perpetuating 2 myths. One is, you're young, take more risk. 2, the more risk you take, that usually means higher returns. Wrong. All right, so what most physician clients should be looking at is trying to get a consistent somewhere, 5 to 9% return. That way you're not ever having the big losses, and then you don't ever have the big upsides, but you don't need the big upsides if you don't have the big losses. If you could steadily get a 6 to 8% return over and over again, and your bad year is -4, and maybe your good year is +12, you're going to be better off down the road. I'll show you here in a minute. But remember, this advice too generally is geared towards what? The $59,000 income, right? Again, most of the stuff that you read in popular media is geared towards as many readers as possible. You guys are already in the upper 10% of the income bracket. Soon you'll be in the upper 5, and some of you will be in the upper 1% income bracket, which is only, I don't know, $390,000 or something. To be in the 1%, it's not as much as you think it is. And so nobody writes a magazine for 1% of the population, right? So take enough risk to get what we try to get on a portfolio return is taxes plus inflation, which is about 6%, right? And then your money will grow. Higher risk means higher returns. Higher risk just means higher volatility. The larger of the gap between the peak and the trough. That's all risk means here, right? Questions? This is usually the one where people they really perk up because everybody always thinks I'm going to talk about investments all day long. Questions? Okay. Smart people. We're going to take a little vote. Portfolio A, Portfolio B. Portfolio A is almost all double-digit returns, except for here. Only one double-digit return in Portfolio B. So you're looking at some mutual fund chart, something blah, 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 whatever. Some money manager shows you their track return. 24, 16, 21, 15, 18, 10. Who wants Portfolio A? Who wants Portfolio Come on, you got to raise your hand. This is the interactive part. Everybody for portfolio A? Suckers. Portfolio B? All right. Well, are you sure about that? Because if you look at the average annual return, they have the exact same average annual return, 4.8, over a 10-year period of time. Anybody want to change your mind on this? The compound effects of investment of $10,000 over that 10-year time period, it's the big losses. And the only time you're going to have really the big losses is when you're shooting for the high-risk portfolio. A minus 40% return, it took them 4 years to get back to even. Meanwhile, the tortoise over here made back their loss in the very next year, and by the 4th year was still ahead of portfolio A at break-even. And then throw in a couple more losses, and they're still ahead. So you don't need the big returns if you don't have the big losses. Now, someday you may just get a big return just because, the rising tide moves all boats, or whatever that saying is. But trying to limit, and like I said, so this is a 64 points from peak to trough. That's high risk, high volatility. 22 points, right? So you just got to look at the numbers. And again, slow and steady over the long run. Because, what if somebody had wanted to retire? They built up this massive portfolio, and then they had the late 90s, which I was working at the time, 96 through 99, and we were getting like 36% return per year. The rule of 72 means that your money is doubling like every 2 years or something like that, right? So if somebody says, hey, I've tripled my money in the last 5 years, I'm ready to retire, it's 2000, start taking money out. 2000, 2001, 2002, 3 negative years in a row, and their portfolio with their income distributions is worth about half what it was just 3 years ago. So the thing is, you never know when these years are going to come up. Question? Okay. Number 10, not understanding the impact of taxes on wealth accumulation over time. Try to utilize every tax break that you can. Just a nominal 4% difference in what you pay in taxes can make a compounded over time, makes a huge difference. Try to find a tax professional that you work with that's proactive, meaning that you meet with them in June, let's say, and say, hey, there's 6 months left in the year, because the tax law changes all throughout the year. And sometimes there may be a tax law change that you've got just a few more months to take advantage of for this tax year. Because most of the things that you can deduct, you have to do prior to 12/31 before the end of the year. So if a tax law changes in, say, October, you got 3 months left to try to take advantage of that. So try to work with somebody who's proactive, who's managing your taxes much as like somebody manages their money. And again, it's working smarter or working harder. Would you like to see $40,000 more patients per year? Probably not likely, just physically impossible. Or make $40,000 more. The other thing, too, about taxes is it's codified. The federal government, the IRS, has laid out, if you do these 3 things, here's the deduction or the exemption or whatever you can get, right? So I tell people, again, managing risk, if you're talking to an investment advisor and says, hey, I can get you an additional $10,000 return on this particular investment, and then your CPA says, well, hey, if you just do these 3 things, we can save you $10,000 in taxes. I know, based on the law, that what you said is I'm going to get $10,000 in savings and taxes. The investment advice is an educated guess, a wish, a hope. It may be very likely, and then often, too, a $10,000 gain in your investment is also going to be taxable, where this is just saving money on taxes. So it's a much more conservative way to try to manage your money. So just compound interest here. Physician makes $250,000 a year. She's able to save an additional 4% a year in taxes, $10,000 a year. She's able to do that for 25 years. $10,000 savings compounded at 4% is $416,000 at the end of that 25-year period. Because she used the 529 plan, and she did this and that and whatever, right? is a problem that a lot of times people have in not having a coherent plan with all your advisors. So you have an insurance agent, a money manager, a banker, a lawyer, an accountant, and they're all giving you different advice. Really, this is about time leverage. Find one person in your life that is going to coordinate all these things. To give you an example, I had a CPA call me up last year and said, hey, how come Dr. So-and-so, why isn't she doing a SEP IRA? If she qualifies for the full amount, she would save, $15,000 in taxes this year if she would do her SEP IRA. And I'm like, well, her plan calls for doing a Roth IRA at $5,000, not a $50,000 SEP, or 42 or whatever it was, because she's got almost $200,000 in debt, and that's her highest priority right now. So we're saving some, but we're really trying to focus the bulk of the assets on paying off debt. And of course, he called her first, and then she called me right after that and said, hey, my CPA says I could be getting a $15,000 tax savings. Right, Doc, but you said, and she's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. See, because very oftentimes, Sherry's not in the room anymore, very oftentimes CPAs only look at the immediate now, not the long-term, what is the big plan, the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan, the 20-year plan. Most CPAs are only looking at what kind of tax deduction can you get now. And he was completely unaware that she had all this debt. So, that was conflicting advice, potentially. So try to find somebody who can quarterback your team, make a plan, make sure everybody's on board with that plan, and all your team members understand what your goals are. Number 12, this is a great one. Anybody been hit up yet by their friends to make an investment in anything? You wear a white coat, you're a doctor, right? Not yet. It will happen to you at some point. I've seen, well, okay. Every time I think I've seen it all, somebody comes up with a new one, right? But fertilizer plants, that's very politely put. A client of mine once was convinced to invest in a manure spreader. Well, it did more than that. But anyway, restaurants are very common, but there's all kinds of things, bars, horse ranches, whatever. But the thing about it is everybody has a great idea of what to do with your money, right? And so a lot of times to invest in these things can involve additional risk, particularly like a bar or something like that. And then there's just out-and-out fraud. So I had a client invest in this real estate investment in this resort, and part of the deal. And so this one guy got all his friends to invest in it, $25,000 each. And this friend had another friend, so forth and so on. And part of the deal was that you got to go to these resorts and stay for free because you're a shareholder, right? This is a small thing, like a small chain, 6, 8 resorts. So they book this trip. They get up there like, well, we're here with here's our preferred card. They're like, wait, we have no idea what you're talking about. And like, well, yeah, we invested in this resort, and so we get to stay here at this, preferred rate. And they're like, no. And they get this huge argument, and finally they are able to get, like, the CFO on the phone or something. And it's like, yeah, this is a complete scam. You're like the 5th person this summer who's come in. We have no idea what you're talking about. We're not affiliated with this group. It's just complete fraud. Just throw money away. So here's what. Now, the other problem, too, sometimes it's hard to tell your friends no, right? So here's what my clients do. They're like, hey, what's your name? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to shoot you and I. What? Charles. All right. So somebody says, hey, Charles, I've got this plan for you to invest $50,000 in whatever. And you're like, oh, great. That's an awesome idea. And we've known each other for a long time. I totally trust you. It sounds like a great idea. But I don't make any decisions until my financial advisor looks at it, right? And then I tell them no, because, I don't know this person. It doesn't bother me to tell them no. And, most of the times my clients really want to say no. I rarely actually ever vet it. I mean, they're just like, look, I don't want to do this, but I can't tell them no. So they call me and I say, looks nice, but we're not going to do that. So anyway, it saves a lot of problems at like class reunions and barbecues and stuff. This is another very, very common one. It's not just unique to physicians, but it happens a lot. So there's always that one guy, that one person in your group who's told you about all this money that they made, and almost universally, it's a guy. Okay, I'm not being sexist. It's almost always a guy, and they're perceived as having to know a lot, and they've made all this money, and you've heard nothing for years about how much money they made. They're always on their iPhone. I literally saw a doctor one time that had an office built, and it looked like the trading floor at J.P. Morgan. He had like 5 screens. His nurses literally would have to pull him out of trading to go see patients, right? Okay, those guys never tell you about their losses, though. You only hear about their great returns and their great investments. And what happens is typically the other docs are usually just so busy that it's just better to listen to this one person and, hey, he's made so much money, and then you open up a TD Ameritrade account or Schwab account or something like that, and you don't, even if it's solid advice, most people don't monitor it like that guy does, and he's making his trades, and then your investment goes down, and you own this dog, and he traded out of that thing 3 months ago, and he just never told you that he made that trade. So do your own, find somebody, if you want to leverage your time, find somebody that will actually do that for you. Beware of following the herd. Like I said, it's usually more like lemmings, or do your own research. Okay, we're about to wrap up here. Number 14, not saving enough. Make a plan, stick to it, and the earlier on in your life you can tackle your debt and start saving some money, the better off you're going to be. But there's always an excuse not to. There's a litany of reasons, right? But even if you have a lot of debt, and I'll show you on this next slide or two, start saving something. Do saving and debt, and begin to take the advantages of compound interest. So let's say that you have, this is what I call live well now and live without worry later on, or live really well later on, right? Again, the resident plus lifestyle. Pay off debt as soon as possible. $375,000 30-year mortgage at 4.5%. If paid off in 10 years, saves $218,000 in interest. It's just a phenomenal. That's almost the purchase price of the house, 2/3 of it anyway, or so. They're overpaying that. They went from a $1,900 mortgage to monthly payment to a $3,900 monthly payment. So that's $46,800 a year. If they invested that extra $46,000 a year at 6%, for the remainder of that time, the other 20 years on the 30-year mortgage, that's $1 million. So in all, it's almost like 1.3 because they saved $218,000 in interest, and they were able to accumulate 1.1 more or less. So paying off debt early is a good thing, but saving early as well. So $10,000 invested each year at 6% for 25 years is $548,000. However, if somebody was focused on paying off their debt and they waited 5 years, they invested $10,000 at 6% for 20 years, $367,000. 5 years, $180,000 difference. Big deal. So the plan, try to save some and pay off debt at the same time. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. So the goal is, in my opinion, is to become financially independent, which means you have zero debt in your life. Zero personal debt. You may always have business debt, and business debt is a different category of debt because business debt is something that you invest in, like a rental property, and your renters are paying it off for you. So business debt is something that is generating income for you, right? But being financially independent means having all your personal debt paid for and having enough passive income coming in that replaces your cost of living, all right? Not necessarily necessarily your income, but it replaces your cost of living. So, say somebody lives on $8,000 a month. Over 15 years, they inflate at 3.5% interest inflation rate. That inflates to $160,000 a year in 15 years. 4% of $4 million gets you that number. So if they start saving $73,000 a year, which may or may not be doable, that gets them to $4 million in 25 years. Right? So in this scenario, and maybe this is a spouse income. Maybe this is a good PA income or something, nurse practitioner income. You're the physician, you're working, you're paying off the debt, we're saving your spouse's income. And for the first 10 years that you're paying off your mortgage from this slide, right? You're paying off your mortgage. $73,000 at 6% for 10 years is almost $1 million. But then the next 20 or so, you save the $73,000 plus what you're paying for your mortgage at 6%. In addition to the $965,000 you already saved, it becomes $4 million in 9 years. So in 19 years, just on this savings alone, we're not even talking about rental real estate or whatever, a 30-year-old physician could achieve financial independence at 49 years old. And then after that, live as well as you spend every dime after that. Because you've got your investments now that can produce passive income, which means whatever happens to your income at work, Obamacare, reimbursements, regulate, whatever, doesn't matter. You've got enough passive income to pay for your lifestyle. You can walk away from work at any time. The last one, thinking it will never end. At some point and somewhere on your horizon, the money is going to stop coming in. 2 examples.
Victor with housekeeping, please call Frida extension 1046. Victor with housekeeping, please call Frida at extension 1046. Thank you.
I worked with a surgeon one time who woke up one day and realized he had saved about $600,000. He worked in a period of time when reimbursements were rising, and if he ever needed anything, he just did a few more gallbladders that week, right? And he got to be later in life and realized, yeah, I've got $600,000. Everything's paid for. I've got all these toys. I can't live on this amount of money. His CPA actually made him sign a power of attorney, and the CPA paid all the bills. He put the husband and wife on an allowance, and he worked for 8 more years, and at 68, he had $2 million saved. And so he retired on about $100,000 a year, not quite the $400,000 or $500,000 a year he was making as a surgeon, but it was better than the $24,000 a year he would have made on the $600,000 he had saved already. But he did not have the ability to save money, he didn't have the discipline to do it, and he never really needed to because he could always just work to make more money to buy whatever he wanted to buy. That was the trick. But eventually, that time runs out. The other one here is I was sitting down talking to a surgeon one day. He said, Jason, when I started doing this, he said, I did surgery for 3 days a week. I did clinic 1 day a week, and I played golf every Friday. He said, now I do surgery 4 days a week, sometimes 5. I have 2 PAs hired to do my clinic. He goes, once in a while on a Sunday, I get to play golf. Because that was 35 years ago. He said, you know the difference? He goes, the part that really bothers me, I make as much now as I did back then. I'm working twice as hard. He never really ever prepared for the end game, the final part of his career. So think long term because, and although that may be 30 years away for some people in here, it is going to end eventually, and you have to be building your wealth along the way, and hopefully try to avoid some of the 14 traps that we've talked about prior to this. I think we have about